The hum of the massive projector was the only sound in the small, private viewing booth at the back of the theater. Down below, the screen was flashing with the final scenes of a high-octane chase, explosions lighting up the dark room in bursts of orange and white. But Keanu Reeves wasn't really watching the movie. He was sitting forward in his chair, his elbows resting on his knees, staring not at the screen, but at the backs of the heads of the people sitting in the rows of red velvet seats. From this high vantage point, they looked like a single, moving organism. He could see the glow of smartphone screens illuminating faces here and there, the slump of shoulders, the heads leaning together to whisper. It was strange. He had spent decades of his life making these films, traveling the world, doing press conferences, and walking red carpets. He had seen his face on billboards in Tokyo and bus stops in New York. Yet, sitting here in the darkness, he felt a strange distance between himself and the people watching his work. He wondered what they were thinking. Did they actually like the movie? Were they just killing time, or were they, like he used to be when he was a kid, looking for an escape from a hard day? Keanu leaned back and rubbed his face. The theater was one he had invested in, a place he cared about deeply, but he rarely got to see it like this. Usually, when he visited, it was a PR event. Everyone knew who he was. The staff were nervous, the guests were excited, and the air was thick with expectation. It was impossible to know what people really felt when they knew the star was watching them. He wanted to see the truth. He wanted to see the theater when it was just a place for ordinary people. A thought popped into his head, one of those ideas that seem silly at first but starts to grow roots almost immediately. He stood up quietly, the leather of the chair creaking softly. He walked out of the private booth and into the long, carpeted hallway that led to the staff areas. The atmosphere changed instantly. The smell of stale popcorn and floor wax replaced the scent of fresh leather and expensive perfume. The walls were plain white, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. He walked past the concession stand, which was now closed, its metal shutters pulled down. He passed the ticket taker's stand, empty and waiting for the morning crowd. He kept walking until he reached the break room, a small, cluttered space near the back exit. On a hook by the door hung a uniform. It was a simple gray outfit with the theater's logo stitched on the chest. Next to it sat a baseball cap, slightly worn at the brim. Keanu looked at the uniform, then at a mirror on the wall. He saw the famous face that everyone recognized. If he walked out there right now, the spell would be broken. People would stop looking at the screen and start looking at him. But if he wore that uniform, if he became just another person cleaning up the mess, it was a crazy idea, definitely something a movie star shouldn't do. But that was exactly why it made sense to him. He checked the clock on the wall. The movie was nearly over. In about 5 minutes, the credits would roll, the lights would come up, and hundreds of people would flood out into the lobby, leaving behind their trash, their empty cups, and their thoughts. He reached out and took the uniform off the hook. It was made of cheap, rough polyester, nothing like the custom suits he wore to premieres. He pulled the gray shirt on over his t-shirt. It was a little loose in the shoulders and tight in the arms, but it fit well enough. He buttoned it up to the top collar. Then, he picked up the baseball cap. He pulled it down low over his forehead, shielding his eyes. He looked in the mirror again. The man staring back wasn't Keanu Reeves. He looked tired, anonymous, just a guy trying to get through a shift. He grabbed a plastic bin and a broom from the supply closet. The broom handle was smooth from years of use. He held it in his hands, gripping it tightly. His heart was beating a little faster than usual, a mix of nerves and excitement. This was like a scene from a movie, except there was no script. He didn't know what was going to happen. He didn't know what he would hear or see. He walked out of the break room and down the service corridor toward the main auditorium doors. He could hear the movie ending. The orchestral score was swelling to a crescendo. He pushed through the heavy swinging door that led into the back of the theater, right behind the last row of seats. The screen was huge, filling his vision. The credits began to roll, white names scrolling up against a black background. The house light slowly started to rise. At first, it was just a dim glow, but then it got brighter, revealing the reality of the room. Keanu stood still in the shadows, his broom in hand, watching. People began to stand up. The sound of rustling clothes and zipping jackets filled the air. No one looked back. Everyone was facing forward, already talking about where they were going to eat or what they thought of the ending. A few people stretched their arms high, letting out groans of relief after sitting for 2 hours. Then, the aisles began to fill. Keanu took a deep breath and stepped out from the shadows. He walked toward the nearest row, sweeping the broom across the carpeted floor in a rhythmic motion. Swish, swish, swish. A group of teenagers walked right past him. They were laughing loudly, quoting a funny line from the movie. One of them stepped on the edge of the dustpan Keanu was holding, kicking it slightly. The boy didn't even apologize. He just kept walking, engrossed in his conversation with his friends. Keanu didn't feel angry. He felt invisible. It was a strange sensation. He was used to people moving out of his way, or looking at him with wide eyes. Now, he was just part of the furniture. He moved down the row, picking up empty tubs of popcorn and half-filled soda cups. The soda was heavy and lukewarm, sloshing against the plastic. He placed them in his bin. As he worked, he caught snippets of conversations. "I told you he was going to jump," a man in a leather jacket said to his partner. Yeah, you were right. "But the ending was dumb," she replied, rolling her eyes. Keanu kept his head down, the brim of the cap hiding his face. He focused on the trash. He saw crumpled napkins, candy wrappers, and a lone child's shoe left under a seat. He realized how much mess was left behind after the magic of the movie ended. The audience saw the glamour, the cleaners saw the aftermath. He made his way to the front of the theater, near the screen. The crowd was thinning out now, heading toward the exits in the lobby. Keanu stopped sweeping for a moment and looked around the large, emptying room. He saw a young man sitting alone a few rows back. The young man wasn't leaving. He was just sitting there, staring at the rolling credits as if they held the answers to his problems. Keanu watched him for a second. He wanted to go talk to him, to ask if he was okay, but he held back. He wasn't Keanu the movie star right now, he was Charlie the cleaner. He had a role to play. He had to blend in. So, he turned back to his work, sweeping up a pile of popcorn kernels that had been scattered across the floor like confetti. The theater was almost empty now. The noise had died down, replaced by the quiet hum of the air conditioning system. The lights were fully bright now, showing every stain on the carpet and every smudge on the seats. It wasn't glamorous. It was real life. And for the first time in a long time, Keanu felt like he was a part of it, not just observing it from a pedestal. He adjusted his cap, tightened his grip on the broom, and prepared to see what else the night would reveal, unaware that this simple experiment was about to show him something that would change his heart forever. The heavy metal doors swung shut behind the last of the moviegoers, leaving the auditorium in a sudden, echoing silence. Keanu stood still for a moment, listening to the hum of the air vents. The rush was over, but his shift wasn't. He adjusted the brim of his cap, pulling it even lower, and gripped the handle of the dustpan. He walked out of the dark theater and into the brightly lit main hallway, heading toward the lobby where the crowds were gathering their coats and checking their phones. As he stepped into the lobby, the atmosphere hit him. It was loud and chaotic. The smell of burnt popcorn mixed with the heavy scent of expensive perfume and cologne. Keanu moved to the side, near a large potted plant, and began to sweep up a pile of napkins that had been dropped on the floor. It was amazing to him how quickly people's behavior changed when they thought no one important was watching. A group of well-dressed young professionals walked past him, laughing loudly. One of them, a man in a sharp suit, was holding a large soda. He wasn't paying attention to where he was going. He bumped into Keanu's shoulder, hard enough to make Keanu stumble back a step. The man didn't stop. He didn't say excuse me or look back. He just kept walking, continuing his story about a business deal as if Keanu were nothing more than a concrete pillar. Keanu righted himself and watched them go. In his normal life, that man would have probably stopped, recognized him, and asked for a selfie. But dressed in a gray uniform with a broom in his hand, Keanu was invisible. It was a stark lesson in how the world treats people based on what they are wearing. He continued sweeping, moving down the long corridor toward the restrooms. He passed a young couple who were having a quiet but intense argument near the wall. The girl was wiping tears from her eyes, trying to be quiet, while the boy looked frustrated, checking his watch repeatedly. "I just don't understand why you have to make a scene," the boy whispered, shaking his head. "I'm not making a scene," the girl shot back, her voice trembling. "I just wanted to spend time with you. You've been on your phone the whole night." They were standing right next to a trash can Keanu was emptying. He felt awkward, like an intruder on a private moment, but he couldn't leave. He had to look busy. He focused intently on picking up a stray straw wrapper from the floor, pretending he couldn't hear a word they were saying. The girl looked over at Keanu, her eyes red and puffy. For a second, their eyes met. She looked at him with a mixture of embarrassment and sadness. Keanu gave her a small, sympathetic nod, a silent gesture that said, "I see you, and it's okay." She seemed surprised by the kindness from a stranger in a uniform. She took a deep breath, turned back to the boy, and said, "I'm going to go home. Call me when you actually want to be here." She walked away, her heels clicking on the tile floor. The boy stood there for a moment, looking annoyed, before stuffing his hands in his pockets and following her. Keanu watched them go. He realized that the theater wasn't just a place for entertainment. For many, it was a backdrop to their real lives, a place where relationships were tested and broken. He had always thought his movies brought people together, but here, in the harsh light of the lobby, he saw that life was much more complicated than a 2-hour script. He moved on to the concession stand area. The rush was dying down now, but the mess left behind was incredible. It looked like a tornado had hit. There were pools of melted butter on the counter, kernels of popcorn scattered like pebbles on a beach, and cups half full of sticky soda left on every surface. Keanu grabbed a spray bottle and a rag from his supply cart. He began to wipe down the counters. His hands worked automatically, the motion soothing. As he cleaned, he watched a few stragglers leaving the theaters. He saw an older man walking slowly, holding the arm of an elderly woman. They were moving carefully, stepping over the mess on the floor. "Watch your step, dear," the man said gently. "I'm fine, just tired," the woman whispered. They saw Keanu cleaning the counter. Unlike the businessman earlier, they stopped. The old man smiled at Keanu. "Tough night tonight, son?" he asked kindly. Keanu looked up, surprised by the question. He didn't speak, afraid his voice would give him away. He just nodded and offered a tired smile. "Good work," the man said. "We appreciate it." They walked slowly toward the exit. Keanu stood there, holding the rag. That small interaction, just a few seconds of kindness, meant more to him than he expected. It reminded him that despite the rudeness he had seen earlier, there was still goodness in ordinary people. He realized that the staff who worked here night after night probably dealt with a lot of negativity, but they also had these small, human moments that kept them going. He finished wiping the counter and moved toward the large trash bins near the exit. He lifted a heavy bag filled with popcorn and discarded cups. It was surprisingly heavy. He grunted slightly as he hoisted it over his shoulder. The weight of it was a physical reminder of the labor involved in keeping this place running. He had never had to think about the weight of the trash before. He just assumed the trash disappeared. As he walked toward the back dumpster to toss the bag, he passed the main entrance again. The crowds had thinned out significantly. The lobby was now mostly empty, echoing with the sounds of the cleaning crew in the distance. He saw a group of 3 young men sitting on a bench near the doors. They weren't in a hurry to leave. They were slumped over, looking at their phones, their backpacks at their feet. Keanu walked past them to dump the trash bag. When he came back, he slowed down. They were talking in low voices. They didn't look like the typical movie crowd. They looked tired, their clothes a bit worn out. One of them, a thin guy with a hood over his head, was rubbing his eyes. "I don't know if I can do another shift," the hooded guy said. "I'm beat." "You have to," his friend said, tapping his phone screen. "Rent is due next week. We're short." Keanu pretended to sweep the floor near the bench, getting close enough to hear but trying to look uninterested. He remembered that feeling, the dread of bills, the exhaustion of working double shifts, the stress of trying to survive. He had lived in his car once, a long time ago. He knew what it was like to not know where your next meal was coming from. "Maybe I can sell my old console," the third guy suggested quietly. "It's not worth much, but it might help cover the electric bill." Keanu's heart tightened. Here they were, worrying about basic survival, while he had just spent millions on a new car or a house he barely lived in. He felt a sudden, intense pang of guilt. He looked at the worn-out sneakers on their feet. He looked at the dark circles under their eyes. This was the reality for so many people. It was the reality he had escaped from, but it was still right here, happening in his own theater, just a few feet away from where he stood. He wanted to reach into his pocket and pull out his wallet. He wanted to pay their rent and buy them dinner. But he stopped himself. He was Charlie the cleaner right now. If he pulled out a thick wad of cash, it would be suspicious. It would break the spell. It might even embarrass them. So, he kept sweeping, pushing the dustpan back and forth, listening to their struggle. The hooded guy sighed deeply, a sound of pure exhaustion. "Let's just go," he said, standing up slowly. Maybe the movie helped a little. It was nice to forget about everything for 2 hours. They gathered their things and stood up. As they walked past Keanu, one of them accidentally kicked a discarded soda cup. It rolled toward Keanu's feet. The young man stopped and looked at Keanu. "Sorry about that," he said, actually bending down to pick it up himself. He tossed it in a nearby bin and gave Keanu a nod. "Have a good night, man." "You too," Keanu managed to whisper, keeping his head down. He watched them walk out the automatic doors into the cold night air. They huddled together against the wind as they walked down the street. Keanu stood alone in the center of the lobby. The floor was clean, the trash was gone, and the lights were buzzing overhead. The invisibility of the uniform had shown him so much already. He had seen arrogance, heartbreak, kindness, and poverty. But there was something else lingering in the air, something he hadn't quite figured out yet. He realized that the movie playing on the screen wasn't the most important story in this building. The real stories were the ones people were living in the seats and the lobby. He looked back toward the dark hallway that led to the restrooms. He still had one more area to check. He tightened his grip on the broom and started walking. He didn't know it yet, but the most important moment of the night was waiting for him just around the corner, in the shadows of the back hallway, where a voice was about to speak words that would shake him to his core. The lobby was finally quiet. The last of the popcorn had been swept away, and the giant trash bins were overflowing with the remnants of the night. Keanu leaned against the broom handle for a moment, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. The uniform felt hot and scratchy against his skin, but he didn't mind it. It felt like armor in a way, protecting him from the fake smiles and polite nods he was used to. He looked down the long hallway that led back to the auditoriums. Most of the lights were dimming now, signaling that the shift was winding down for the customers, though the real work was just beginning for the crew. He decided to do one last walkthrough of the main auditorium, the one where the largest crowd had been. He wanted to make sure nothing valuable had been left behind before the heavy cleaning machines came in. He pushed through the double doors and stepped into the darkness. The screen was completely black now, the projector having shut off minutes ago. Only the safety lights along the floor cast a faint, eerie glow over the rows of empty seats. It smelled different in here now. The smell of butter was fading, replaced by the stale scent of old carpet and the breath of hundreds of people. Keanu walked slowly up the sloped aisle, his shoes making no sound on the soft floor. He scanned the seats, looking for glints of metal or light from a forgotten phone. When he reached the back row, near the wall, he stopped. There was a dark stain on the carpet, right in the middle of the walkway. It looked like someone had spilled a large soda. Keanu sighed, knelt down, and unclipped the spray bottle from his belt. He sprayed the stain with cleaning fluid and began to scrub it with a rough rag. The motion was rhythmic and repetitive. Scrub, wipe, twist. Scrub, wipe, twist. As he worked, focused entirely on the spot in front of him, he heard voices. He froze. The sound came from the corner of the back row, just a few feet away from where he was kneeling on the floor. Two figures were sitting in the dark, silhouetted against the dim emergency exit sign. Keanu held his breath. He was practically invisible in the dark, wearing his dark uniform, crouched low. They clearly hadn't noticed him yet. It's getting harder to pretend, man, one voice said. It was a young man's voice, quiet and shaky. I wake up every morning, and for the first 5 seconds, I'm okay. And then I remember everything. The debt, the job I hate, the feeling that I'm just stuck. Like I'm underwater. Keanu stayed perfectly still, his hand hovering over the wet carpet. He knew he should probably announce his presence, or at least make a noise so he wouldn't scare them. But something in the tone of the voice stopped him. It was raw. It was the kind of voice people only use when they think they are completely alone. You're not stuck, the second voice said. This one sounded calmer, older maybe. You're just in a rough patch. We talked about this. I know, I know, the first voice replied, letting out a long, shuddering sigh. But honestly, last night, I was thinking about checking out. For good. I was sitting in my car, just thinking about how easy it would be to just drive and not stop. Keanu felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He gripped the rag tighter. This wasn't movie dialogue. This was real life, heavy and painful. But you didn't, the friend said gently. No, I didn't, the young man said. Because I remembered we were coming here tonight. I remembered I wanted to see this movie. And honestly, it sounds stupid, but it saved me. Keanu stopped breathing for a second. He kept his head down, staring at the soda stain, but his ears were straining to catch every word. It's not stupid, the friend said. It is, it's just a movie, the young man continued. But watching that character, watching him get beaten down, over, and lose everything, and still get back up, it made me feel like maybe I could get back up too. If he can keep fighting when the whole world is against him, maybe I can handle just one more day of my boring, terrible life. The silence that followed was heavy. Keanu felt a lump forming in his throat. He had spent months filming those scenes. He remembered the bruises, the cold rain, the exhaustion of repeating the same stunt 50 times. At the time, it was work. It was a job. He worried about whether the camera angle was right or if the punch looked real. He never imagined, not for a second, that his fictional pain could act as a lifeline for a stranger's real pain. The young man spoke again, his voice a little stronger. Seeing him fight, it gave me a spark, man. Just a little one. But it's enough. Keanu slowly stood up. He knew he couldn't hide forever. As he rose to his feet, his knees cracked slightly. The two figures in the corner jumped, startled by the sudden noise in the dark. Who's there? One of them asked sharply, turning toward the sound. Keanu stepped back slightly into the shadow of the wall, keeping the cap low over his eyes. He didn't speak. He just pointed toward the exit, signaling that he was just staff and they needed to leave. Oh, sorry, the young man said, his voice shifting instantly from vulnerable to embarrassed. He stood up quickly, brushing off his jeans. We're going. Just leaving. Have a good night, the friend mumbled, looking a bit uncomfortable that they had been overheard. They hurried past Keanu, heading up the aisle toward the bright lobby lights. As they passed him, Keanu got a good look at the young man who had been speaking. He looked tired. He looked like an average guy, maybe 20 years old, wearing a hoodie that had seen better days. He looked nothing like a hero. He looked like someone who was barely holding it together. But as he walked past, the young man looked at Keanu. He didn't look at him with disgust, like the man in the suit had. He didn't look through him, like the others. He looked at him with a sort of quiet solidarity. He gave a small, hesitant nod, as if to say, "Thanks for doing your job." Then they were gone, disappearing into the light of the hallway. Keanu stood alone in the dark row. The adrenaline of eavesdropping faded away, replaced by a profound sense of stillness. He looked down at the clean spot on the carpet where the stain had been. The conversation replayed in his mind over and over, "It saved me." He looked up at the giant black screen where his face had been projected just an hour ago. He felt a disconnect so wide it made him dizzy. Up there, he was an immortal action hero, a billionaire, a legend. But down here, in the dark, he was just a guy in a costume, scrubbing floors. And the most important thing that had happened all night wasn't the premiere or the applause. It was that quiet confession in the back row. Keanu realized that he had been looking at his career from the wrong angle. He was obsessed with the art, the performance, and the business. But the people in the seats weren't judging his acting. They were using his movies to survive their own lives. They were looking for a reason to hope. He took a deep breath, the air still smelling of stale popcorn. He felt a heavy weight on his shoulders, but it wasn't a burden. It was a responsibility. If his work could give that spark to someone who was suffering, then he couldn't take it lightly. He couldn't just walk away and go back to his mansion and forget about the kid in the hoodie. He picked up his spray bottle and his rag. He needed to finish his shift. But something had fundamentally changed inside him. The disguise had done its job. It had stripped away the ego and the fame, leaving him raw enough to see the truth. And now that he saw it, he knew he couldn't unsee it. He walked out of the row and headed toward the exit, his mind racing with thoughts of what else he didn't know about the people walked past him every day. He was no longer just the actor on the screen, he was a witness to the silent battles being fought in the dark. Keanu walked out of the dark auditorium, but the young man's voice stayed with him, echoing in his mind like a song he couldn't shake. He stood in the hallway for a moment, letting the sounds of the settling theater wash over him. The buzz of the lights, the distant hum of a vacuum cleaner, the heavy thud of a dumpster being closed outside the building. It was the soundtrack of real life. He looked down at his hands. They were rougher than usual, slightly red from the cleaning chemicals and the hot water. He flexed his fingers. For years, his hands had been insured for millions of dollars. They were the hands of a movie star, trained to hold guns, punch bad guys, or sign autographs. But tonight, they were just hands that had scrubbed a soda stain off a carpet. And strangely, he felt more proud of that than he had of any premiere he had attended. He realized he wasn't ready to take the uniform off yet. He needed to see more. He needed to understand the world he had been living above for so long. He walked toward the back of the building, where the staff break room was located. The door was propped open with a doorstop. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of microwave burritos and strong coffee. A few people were sitting around a small, wobbly table. They looked exhausted. There was an older woman with gray hair tied back in a tight bun, rubbing her feet through her sneakers. There was a young guy wearing a headset around his neck, staring blankly at a half-eaten sandwich. They didn't notice Keanu standing in the doorway. To them, he was just Charlie, the new guy or the filler who had picked up the extra shift. Keanu walked in slowly and grabbed a bottle of water from the vending machine in the corner. The machine hummed and clunked as the bottle fell. He sat down on a plastic chair near the wall, cap still pulled low, listening. "My back is killing me," the older woman said, groaning slightly as she stretched her arms over her head. "The crowds tonight were ruthless. I found spilled popcorn in places I didn't think popcorn could reach." "At least it's over," the young guy with the headset mumbled. He took a bite of his sandwich and chewed slowly. "I just hope my car starts. The battery's been dying all week. If I can't get to my morning shift tomorrow, I'm done." Keanu watched them closely. He saw the dark circles under their eyes. He saw the way the woman's uniform was fraying at the cuffs. He saw the stress in the young man's shoulders as he worried about his car. These were the people who made the theater run. Without them, there would be no movies. There would be no magic. Yet, they were living on the edge, one broken car battery away from disaster. He thought about his own garage, filled with vintage motorcycles and luxury cars that he rarely drove. He thought about the mechanics on his payroll who kept them running perfectly. The contrast made him feel sick to his stomach. It wasn't that he felt guilty for being rich, he had worked hard for his money. But he felt guilty for being oblivious. He had walked through these hallways 100 times as the owner, and he had never really seen the people who worked here. He had seen them as background extras in the movie of his life. The young guy stood up and crumpled his trash. "I'm going to head out. Need every minute of sleep I can get." "Drive safe, honey," the woman said softly. "You too," he replied, shuffling out the door. The woman stayed behind, sipping her coffee. She looked over at Keanu. For the first time, she really looked at him. She didn't see a movie star. She saw a tired co-worker. "You did a good job tonight, Charlie," she said, her voice warm and motherly. "Usually, the new guys complain about the lobby. But you didn't say a word. You just worked." Keanu looked up. He felt a sudden rush of gratitude toward her. She was thanking him. He was the one pretending to be a cleaner, playing a game. She was the one living this life, struggling to pay her bills, and she was thanking him for doing a basic job. "Just trying to help," Keanu said quietly. "Well, we appreciate it," she said, standing up with a groan. She grabbed a heavy trash bag from the corner of the room. "I've got to take this out to the dumpster before I go. It's leaking." "Gross." Keanu immediately stood up. "I'll get it." "No, no," she waved him off. "You've done enough. It's heavy." "I got it," he insisted, stepping forward and taking the bag from her hand. It was heavy, indeed, and wet on the bottom. It smelled of old milk and rot. "Go home. Get some rest." She looked at him, surprised by his insistence, and then she smiled. It was a genuine, tired smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "You're a good man, Charlie. Don't let this place grind you down." She grabbed her purse and walked out, leaving Keanu alone with the leaking bag. He watched her go. "Don't let this place grind you down." He felt the weight of those words. He had spent years worrying about the pressure of fame, the paparazzi, and the critics. But that was a luxury problem. This woman was worried about a leaking trash bag and her aching back, yet she still had the kindness to tell a stranger not to lose his spirit. Keanu heaved the bag onto his shoulder. The liquid from the bottom soaked into the gray fabric of the uniform. He didn't care. He walked out of the break room and down the long hallway toward the back exit. The corridor was dimly lit, the flickering bulb casting shadows that danced on the walls. As he walked, the realization finally hit him fully. It wasn't a single thought, but a wave of understanding that washed over him. The discovery he had been looking for wasn't a secret plot or a hidden treasure. It was the realization of where the real strength in the world lay. He had spent his life playing characters who saved the world. He wore cool jackets, he held weapons, he looked tough. But that was all fake. It was lights and cameras. The people he had met tonight, the woman with the aching back, the kid with the car trouble, the young man in the hoodie finding hope in a movie, the couple arguing, the friends supporting each other, they were the real heroes. They were the ones fighting the battles that didn't have scripts. They didn't have stunt doubles to take the hits. They didn't have makeup artists to cover their bruises. They got up every day, dealt with pain, handled rude customers, worried about money, and they kept going. They cleaned up the messes, both the literal ones in the theater and the emotional ones in their lives, and they did it with a quiet dignity that no camera could ever capture. Keanu pushed the heavy metal door open with his shoulder. The cold night air rushed in, hitting his face. It was raining outside, a steady, cold drizzle that turned the pavement into a mirror reflecting the neon lights of the city. He walked out into the rain, carrying the heavy, leaking bag toward the large metal dumpster. The rain soaked through his uniform, making him cold. But he didn't rush. He felt a strange sense of peace. He felt like he had finally woken up from a long dream. For years, he had been trapped in the bubble of his own success, separated from the world by a wall of money and fame. Tonight, dressed as a cleaner, he had finally broken through that wall. He reached the dumpster and heaved the bag up and over the edge. It landed with a heavy, wet thud inside. He stood there for a moment, breathing in the cold, wet air. He looked back at the theater. From the outside, it looked like a palace of dreams. The marquee lights were flashing, the posters were bright. But Keanu knew the truth now. The magic wasn't the building or the movies. The magic was the resilience of the people. He wiped his wet hands on his pants. He was no longer just an observer. He was a witness. And being a witness came with a responsibility. He couldn't go back to being blind. He couldn't go back to ignoring the invisible people who made his life possible. He knew he couldn't stay Charlie the cleaner forever, but he also knew he couldn't just go back to being Keanu the star. He had to find a way to bridge those two worlds. He had to find a way to use his position to lift these people up, the way they had unknowingly lifted him up tonight. He turned and walked back toward the staff entrance, the rain plastering his hair to his forehead. He had one more thing to do before he took off the uniform. He had to go back inside and find the night manager. He had a feeling that tonight wasn't over yet. The real work was just beginning. The cold rain had soaked through the thin fabric of the uniform, chilling Keanu to the bone, but he didn't hurry as he walked back into the warmth of the staff hallway. He dripped water onto the concrete floor, leaving a trail like a melting snowman. He passed the supply closet and returned the broom and spray bottle to their exact places, making sure everything was tidy. Even though the shift was over, he had too much respect for the job to leave a mess behind. He walked into the small locker room where he had first put on the disguise. It was empty now, the lights flickering slightly. He stood in front of the mirror and slowly took off the baseball cap. He ran a hand through his wet hair, pushing it back. Then, he unbuttoned the gray uniform shirt. He peeled it off his shoulders and hung it carefully on the same hook he had found it on. Underneath, he wore a simple black t-shirt. He looked at his reflection. The famous face was back. The movie star was there. But as he looked into his own eyes, he knew he wasn't the same man who had stood in this spot 2 hours ago. He reached into his bag and pulled out a dry hoodie, pulling it over his head. It felt soft and warm, a stark contrast to the rough polyester he had just worn. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the night settle in his chest. He wasn't ready to go home yet. There was one last thing he needed to do. He walked out of the locker room and headed toward the front of the house. The main lights were dimmed now, and the lobby was quiet. Behind the concession counter, the night manager was counting the cash from the registers. The manager looked tired, his eyes squinting at the receipt tape in his hand. He didn't hear Keanu approach until Keanu was leaning against the counter. The manager jumped, nearly dropping a stack of bills. He looked up, his annoyed wear close dying on his lips as his eyes went wide. He stared at the face in front of him, then looked down at the black hoodie, then back up to the face. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Mr. Reeves, the manager stammered, his voice cracking. Is everything okay? Did something happen? Keanu smiled gently. He held up a hand to calm the man down. Everything is fine. Please, relax. I just wanted to have a word. The manager looked bewildered, glancing around the empty lobby as if he was being pranked. Of course. Sir, I didn't know you were here tonight. Security usually tells us if. I know, Keanu cut in softly. I didn't want security to know. I wanted to see the theater the way you see it. The manager frowned, confused. The way I see it? I borrowed a uniform tonight, Keanu explained, nodding toward the back hallway. I worked the lobby cleanup. I scrubbed the floors and emptied the trash. The manager's jaw dropped. He stared at Keanu as if he had grown a second head. You were cleaning tonight. I was, Keanu said. And I met your team. I saw how hard they work. I saw the crowds they deal with. And I saw how tired they are. Keanu leaned in closer, his expression turning serious. I spoke to a woman in the break room. She has a bad back, but she was moving heavy trash bags because she didn't want to bother anyone. I saw a young guy out by the dumpsters, worried about his car battery so he could get to his morning shift. I watched them smile at customers who treated them like they were invisible. The manager nodded slowly, the confusion fading into a look of pride. They are good people, the manager said quietly. They work hard. It's a tough job, most nights. They are more than good people, Keanu said firmly. They are the reason this place exists. Without them, there is no movie magic. I've been coming to theaters like this for 30 years, and tonight was the first time I actually saw the machine that makes it all run. And I was embarrassed that I never noticed before. He reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out his checkbook. The manager's eyes widened again as Keanu clicked a pen and wrote quickly on the paper. He didn't just write a number, he wrote a number that would change lives. He tore the check out and held it out to the manager. The manager looked at the piece of paper, then at Keanu, shaking his head. Sir, I can't, what is this? This is for the night shift crew, Keanu said. Every single person who worked tonight. The ushers, the concession stand workers, the cleaning crew. I want you to split this between them, and I want you to make sure that young guy with the car problem gets enough to fix his car and pay his rent for a few months. And the woman with the bad back, make sure she gets a bonus that lets her take some time off to rest. Sir, this is too much, the manager whispered, his hands trembling slightly as he took the check. This is more than they make in a year. It's not enough, Keanu said simply. It's just a start. They deserve to know that their work matters. They deserve to feel seen. He looked around the quiet lobby one last time. Please, don't make a big fuss about it. Don't call the news stations. Just tell them it's a bonus from an anonymous donor who appreciates good work. Or tell them the truth, if you want. But make sure they get it. The manager clutched the check, looking at Keanu with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. Thank you, he said softly. Really? This means everything to them. To me. Keanu reached across the counter and shook the manager's hand. It was a firm, solid handshake. No, Keanu said. Thank you. You taught me something tonight. He turned and walked toward the glass doors of the exit. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the city streets wet and glistening under the streetlights. A few cars drove by, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Keanu pushed the door open and stepped out into the cool night air. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the smell of rain and asphalt. He felt lighter than he had in years. For a long time, He had measured his success by box office numbers and ticket sales. He had thought that his contribution to the world was the entertainment he provided on the screen. But now he knew better. The real impact wasn't in the movies. It was in the moments between people. It was in the kindness of a stranger, the resilience of a worker, and the shared hope of a darkened theater. He realized that he had a responsibility, not just as an actor, but as a human being. He had the power to lift people up, to see the invisible, and to share the good fortune that life had thrown his way. He walked down the sidewalk, heading toward where his car was parked. He didn't feel like a star anymore. He felt like a part of the city, a part of the crowd. He thought about the young man in the back row who had found hope in his movie. He thought about the cleaner with the bad back who had shown him kindness. He promised himself that he would never forget them. He would carry this night with him forever. The disguise was gone, but the lesson remained. And as he disappeared into the night, he wasn't just walking home. He was walking forward into a new chapter of his life, one that was much more real than any movie he had ever made.